I was 2 months behind on rent, eating instant noodles off a cracked plate, when I saw the ad that would change everything. Night shift at Haven's Rest Animal Shelter, $20 per hour, no experience needed. It was posted on a sketchy job board I'd been trolling for weeks, the kind where half the listings feel like scams, but I was desperate. My bank account had $13.42, my car was running on fumes, and my landlord's texts were getting nastier by the day. The shelter was an hour's drive from my crumbling apartment in upstate New York, buried in a pine forest so dense it swallowed cell signals. I applied without thinking, sent my resume into the void, and got a call the next morning. A woman's voice, sharp and clipped, said, "Be here Friday. Don't be late." No interview, no questions, just an address and a time. That should have been my first warning. Friday night, I drove my '03 Corolla down a dirt road that barely qualified as a path, the tires crunching over gravel and pine needles. The air was thick with the smell of sap and damp earth, and the sky was so dark it felt like the stars had given up. My headlights caught glimpses of twisted branches, their shapes clawing at the edges of the road like fingers. Haven's Rest appeared around a bend, a low, concrete building that looked more like a bunker than a shelter. Its neon sign buzzed and flickered, the letters, Haven's, barely legible, spitting sparks into the night. I parked, my engine coughing as it died, and sat there, gripping the wheel. Something about the place made my skin itch, like the building itself was watching me. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of wet fur and something sharper, metallic, like old blood. A woman stood behind a chipped Formica counter, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun. She introduced herself as Marjorie, her eyes scanning me like she was sizing up a stray dog. She was in her 60s, wiry, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. They were pale, almost gray, and didn't blink enough. "You're Alex," she said, not asking. "Good. We need reliable people." Her voice was flat, but there was an edge to it, like she was holding back a warning. She handed me a ring of keys, each one labeled with faded tape, and pointed to a door at the back. "Cages are there. Feed them at midnight. Don't open any doors unless I say so. Cameras are on the desk. Watch them." The main room was a long, dim hallway lined with cages, lit by flickering fluorescent bulbs that buzzed like trapped flies. The cages were standard, metal bars, concrete floors, but the animals inside weren't. They looked like dogs, maybe, but their proportions were wrong. Their eyes were too big, their legs too long, their fur patchy and matted. They didn't bark or whine, just sat there, staring. The silence was unnerving, broken only by a faint, rhythmic scratching that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I glanced at the security monitors on the desk. Grainy feeds of the exterior, a storage room. A hallway. One screen was black, labeled basement. I opened my mouth to ask about it, but Marjorie cut me off. "Don't worry about that one. It's offline." Her tone was sharp, like she'd caught me snooping. I nodded, my throat tight, and got to work. My job was cleaning first. The floors were gritty, stained with dark patches that didn't come up no matter how hard I scrubbed. The ammonia cleaner stung my eyes, mixing with that metallic smell that clung to the air. The animals watched me, unblinking, their eyes catching the light like oil slicks. One cage, labeled "Special" in red marker, was covered with a heavy tarp. I heard something move inside, a slow, dragging sound, like wet leather on concrete. My stomach twisted, but I kept my head down and worked faster. Marjorie showed me the feeding chart, a clipboard with handwritten notes. Most animals got raw meat or grain, but the instructions were oddly precise, exact weights, specific times. The "Special" cage had no notes, just a blank line. I asked about it over the walkie-talkie she gave me. "Skip Special," she crackled back. "It's handled." Her voice was cold, final. I didn't push it. I needed this job. As the night wore on, the scratching grew louder, like nails on a chalkboard, constant and directionless. The animals didn't sleep or pace, they just stared. I caught myself glancing at the cameras, the grainy images flickering in the dim light. The exterior feed showed the woods, trees swaying in the wind, but once, just for a second, I thought I saw something else, a tall, thin shape slipping between the trunks. I blinked, and it was gone. My heart thudded, but I told myself it was nothing. Just the dark playing tricks. By midnight, my hands were raw from scrubbing, and the air felt heavier, like a storm was coming. I pushed a cart of food trays down the aisle, the wheels squeaking. The animals didn't move, didn't react, just watched as I slid trays through the slots. Their stillness made my skin crawl, like they were waiting for something. The tarp on the special cage shifted slightly, and I froze, my breath catching. A low, wet rasp came from inside, like air bubbling through thick mud. My hand hovered over the tarp, instinct screaming at me to look, but Marjorie's voice snapped through the walkie, "Don't touch that cage, Alex." I yanked my hand back, my pulse racing, and moved on, the rasp echoing in my head. I didn't look at the cameras again that night. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me back. The days blurred together, each night at Haven's Rest grinding me down. The paychecks hit my account, $800 a week, more than I'd made in months, but the money didn't feel worth it. The shelter was wrong. The animals were wrong. Marjorie was wrong. She'd appear without warning, her gray eyes locking onto me like she knew what I was thinking. "You're doing fine," she'd say, but it sounded like a threat. The notebook I found on the third night didn't help. It was tucked under a stack of papers in the break room, its pages filled with jagged handwriting. "They're not animals," one entry read. "They're experiments. Don't trust Marjorie. Check the basement." My stomach dropped. The basement door was padlocked, a faded sign reading "Authorized personnel only." I'd never seen Marjorie near it, but the thumps I heard late at night, deep and heavy, came from below. I started watching the cameras more closely. The exterior feed showed nothing but trees, but the shadows moved wrong sometimes, too sharp, too fast. The hallway feed was worse. One night, a figure stood in the corner of the frame, still as death, for 10 minutes. I checked the hallway myself, empty. My hands shook as I locked the door behind me. The basement feed stayed black, but once, it flickered, showing a concrete room, a single bulb, and something moving, too big, too wrong. The screen went dark before I could make sense of it. Marjorie caught me staring at the monitors one night. "Focus on your work," she said, her lips moving like she was whispering to someone else. I nodded, my throat dry, but I couldn't stop thinking about the notebook. Experiments. The word stuck in my head, crawling like a spider. The scratching never stopped, louder each night, and the air grew thick, like it was pressing against my chest. The animal's eyes glowed faintly in the dark, following me, always watching. The scratching was louder tonight, a relentless skittering that burrowed into my skull like a drill. I'd been at Haven's Rest for 3 nights, and the shelter's wrongness was sinking deeper into me, like damp rot in old wood. The concrete walls seemed to pulse with it, the air thick with that metallic tang that coated my tongue. The animals, or whatever they were, never barked, never whined, just sat in their cages, their 2 large eyes tracking my every move. I tried to focus on the tasks Marjorie gave me, but the silence was worse than any noise. It wasn't the quiet of a sleeping house, it was the hush of something holding its breath, waiting. I was scrubbing the floors again, the ammonia fumes burning my eyes, when I noticed the cages more closely. The animals looked like dogs at a glance, but the details were off, limbs too long, joints bending at angles that made my stomach twist. Their fur was patchy, like it had been burned off in clumps, revealing gray, glistening skin underneath. One of them, in a cage near the back, stared at me with pupils that shimmered like spilled oil, reflecting the flickering fluorescence. I avoided its gaze, my hands trembling as I pushed the mop. The scratching seemed to follow me, louder when I passed certain cages, softer when I moved away, like it was reacting to me. Marjorie had left me alone tonight, her wiry frame disappearing into a back office after barking orders: clean the floors, check the water bowls, don't touch the special cage. That cage, covered with its heavy tarp, was starting to haunt me. Last night, I'd heard that wet, rasping sound again, like something dragging itself across a slick surface. I hadn't dared look under the tarp, not after Marjorie's voice had snapped through the walkie-talkie, sharp as a blade. But the urge to peek was growing, a nagging itch I couldn't shake. What was in there? Why was it different? The feeding chart was another puzzle. It was pinned to a corkboard near the security desk, written in Marjorie's jagged handwriting. Most cages were labeled with numbers, 1A, 2B, 3C, and listed specific foods, raw meat for some, grain for others, measured to the gram. But the special cage had no instructions, just that blank line that made my skin prickle. I'd asked Marjorie about it again last night, holding the walkie-talkie so tight my knuckles ached. Skip it, she'd said, her voice crackling with static. It's handled. Handled by who? She was the only other person here, as far as I knew. The shelter felt empty, but the cameras told a different story. The security monitors were my lifeline, the only thing keeping me grounded in this place. There were 4 feeds: the exterior, showing the dark woods around the shelter, a storage room filled with crates and shadows, a hallway leading to the back offices, and the blacked-out basement feed that never worked. I'd started checking the cameras obsessively, my eyes darting to the screens every few minutes. The exterior feed was the worst. The pine trees swayed in the wind, their branches clawing at the darkness, but sometimes I'd catch a flicker, a shape, too tall, too thin, slipping between the trunks. It was never there when I looked again, but it left my heart pounding, my palms slick with sweat. Tonight, the hallway feed was acting strange. The image was grainy, the fluorescent lights casting long shadows, but something kept moving at the edge of the frame. Not a person, not an animal, just a blur, like a smudge on the lens that shifted when I wasn't looking. I leaned closer to the monitor, my breath fogging the screen, and saw it again, a shape, vague and humanoid, standing in the corner of the hallway. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, its edges bleeding into the shadows. I stared for a full minute, my pulse hammering in my ears, waiting for it to do something. Then the screen flickered, and it was gone. I grabbed the walkie-talkie, my voice shaky. Marjorie, you there? Something's on the hallway camera. No answer, just static. I stood, my legs wobbly, and grabbed the flashlight from the desk. The hallway was just beyond the main room, a narrow corridor lined with peeling paint and locked doors. I swung the beam around, the light cutting through the gloom, but it was empty. No figure, no shadows, just the faint hum of the fluorescence overhead. I checked the locks on the doors: office, storage, basement, all secure. My hand lingered on the basement door's padlock, cold and heavy under my fingers. The notebook's words flashed in my mind: check the basement. I shook my head, shoving the thought away, and hurried back to the main room. The animals were watching me again, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. I tried to focus on the cleaning, but the scratching was louder now, a chorus of tiny claws scraping against metal and concrete. It wasn't coming from the cages, it was in the walls, the floor, the ceiling, like the whole building was alive. I froze, mop in hand, when I heard it, a low, guttural sound from the special cage, not a rasp this time, but a word. My name. Alex. It was faint, barely audible, but unmistakable. My blood turned to ice. I backed away, the mop clattering to the floor, and fumbled for the walkie-talkie. Marjorie, what the hell is in that cage? No response. Just static, and then a faint laugh, so soft I wasn't sure I heard it. I sat at the security desk, my hands shaking, and stared at the monitors. The hallway feed was clear now, but the exterior feed showed something new. A shape, closer this time, standing just beyond the tree line. It was tall, its limbs unnaturally long, its head tilted at an angle that made my stomach lurch. The camera flickered, and it was gone, but I couldn't shake the image. I checked the locks on the front door, the back door, every window I could find. All secure. But the scratching didn't stop, and the air grew heavier, like it was pressing down on me, squeezing the breath from my lungs. Marjorie finally appeared near the end of my shift, her gray eyes glinting under the fluorescence. "You're jumpy tonight," she said, her smile tight. "Cameras playing tricks?" I didn't tell her about the figure, the voice, the scratching. I just nodded, my throat too dry to speak. She stood at the desk, her fingers brushing the monitors, her lips moving silently like she was talking to someone I couldn't see. "Keep cleaning," she said, her voice sharp. "And stay away from that cage." She didn't wait for a response, just disappeared into the back office, the door clicking shut behind her. I didn't sleep when I got home that morning. I lay in bed, the notebook's words looping in my head, "They're not animals. They're experiments." The scratching echoed in my ears, even miles away from the shelter. I checked my phone, hoping to find the job ad again, to prove this place was real, but the listing was gone. The shelter's website, a bare-bones page I'd found during my application, was down too. Just a 404 error, like it had never existed. I told myself I'd quit, pack up my car and leave, but the latest paycheck had cleared, $800, enough to cover half my back rent. I needed the money. I needed to stay. The next night, I drove back to Haven's Rest, the road darker, the trees closer, like they were leaning in. The neon sign buzzed louder, spitting sparks that lit up the gravel lot. I gripped the keys in my pocket, their edges biting into my palm, and stepped inside. The air was thicker tonight, the metallic smell sharper, like blood left to dry. The animals were waiting, their eyes glowing. And the scratching was everywhere, a symphony of claws that never stopped. I glanced at the special cage, the tarp still in place, and swore I saw it shift, just a fraction, like something inside was pressing against it. I didn't look at the cameras. I didn't want to see what was watching me back. The clock on the security desk read 11:58 p.m., and the air in Haven's Rest felt like it was clotting in my lungs. The scratching had become a constant drone, a grating hum that seemed to vibrate through the concrete walls, the floor, even my bones. For nights into this job, and I was already fraying, my hands chapped from cleaning, my eyes bloodshot from staring at the monitors, my nerves shot from the silence that wasn't silent at all. The animals, those wrong things in the cages, never slept, never barked, just watched me with their glistening, too large eyes. I'd stopped trying to make sense of them. Dogs didn't have limbs that bent like that. Dogs didn't stare like they knew something I didn't. Midnight was feeding time, and I dreaded it. The routine was simple enough: push the cart of food trays down the aisle, slide them through the slots, keep my head down. But nothing about it felt right. The feeding chart, with its precise measurements and cryptic notes, was taped to the cart tonight, Marjorie's jagged handwriting glaring under the flickering fluorescence. 1A, 200g raw beef. 2B, 150g grain. 3C, 300g mixed. The special cage, still draped in that heavy tarp, had no instructions, just that blank line that made my skin crawl. I'd asked Marjorie about it again last night, my voice tight over the walkie-talkie. "Don't worry about special," she'd snapped, her tone sharp enough to cut. "It's handled." Handled. The word stuck in my throat, heavy and wrong, like swallowing a stone. I gripped the cart's handle, the cold metal grounding me as I started down the aisle. The wheels squeaked, the only sound besides the scratching, which seemed to pulse in time with my steps. The animals didn't move, didn't lunge for the food like normal strays. They sat perfectly still, their eyes locked on me, their breath sinking in a way that made my chest tighten. I slid the trays into the slots, one by one, avoiding their gazes. The meat smelled rancid, like it had been sitting out too long, and the grain had a faint, chemical tang that stung my nose. I kept my movements quick, mechanical, trying to ignore the way the air seemed to press against me, thick and heavy, like I was underwater. When I reached the special cage, I froze. The tarp was still, but I heard it again, that wet, rasping sound, like something dragging itself across a slick surface. It was louder tonight, deliberate, like it wanted me to hear. My hand hovered near the cart, my heart thudding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. The walkie-talkie crackled before I could move. "Don't touch that cage, Alex," Marjorie's voice hissed, sharp and sudden, like she'd been watching me. I yanked my hand back, my breath catching, and glanced at the security monitors. The hallway feed was empty, but Marjorie wasn't at the desk. Where was she? How did she know? I pushed the cart past the cage, my legs shaky, and finished the feeding. The animals didn't touch the food, not while I was there. They just stared, their eyes glinting in the dim light, unblinking, like they were waiting for something else. The scratching grew louder, sharper, like claws scraping bone, and I swear it wasn't just in the walls anymore, it was in my head, clawing at the edges of my thoughts. I hurried back to the desk, my flashlight beam jittering across the floor, and sank into the chair, my hands trembling. The monitors flickered, the exterior feed showing nothing but swaying pines, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, just beyond the camera's reach. The notebook was still in the break room, hidden under a stack of papers where I'd left it. I hadn't touched it since that first read, but its words were burned into me, "They're not animals. They're experiments. Don't trust Marjorie. Check the basement." I'd glanced at the basement door last night, its padlock glinting under the fluorescence, but I hadn't dared go near it. The thumps I'd heard, deep and heavy, came from down there, and they weren't random. They had a rhythm, like footsteps, deliberate and slow. I told myself it was pipes, or the building settling, but I didn't believe it. The walkie-talkie crackled again, unprompted. "Everything okay, Alex?" Marjorie's voice was softer this time, almost mocking. I fumbled for the button, my mouth dry. "Yeah. Just, feeding's done." No response, just static, and then that faint laugh again, so soft I could have imagined it. I set the walkie down, my fingers cold, and checked the cameras again. The hallway feed flickered, and there it was, the shape, standing in the corner, motionless. It was taller this time, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. I blinked, and the screen went black for a second before coming back, empty. My stomach lurched. I grabbed the flashlight and checked the hallway again, my boots echoing in the silence. Nothing. Just peeling paint and locked doors. Back at the desk, I tried to focus on the cleaning schedule, but my eyes kept drifting to the monitors. The exterior feed showed the woods, dark and endless, but something moved again, a flicker, a shadow that didn't match the trees. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the screen, and saw it, a figure, thin and impossibly tall, standing just outside the shelter's floodlights. Its limbs were wrong, bending in ways that made my skin crawl, and its head was tilted, like it was listening. The camera flickered, and it was gone, but my heart didn't stop racing. I checked the locks again, my hands shaking so bad I dropped the keys twice. Everything was secure, but it didn't feel secure. Nothing in this place did. Marjorie appeared an hour later, her gray eyes glinting as she leaned over the desk. "You're jumpy again," she said, her smile tight, almost predatory. "Something on the cameras?" I shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. She didn't push, just stood there, her fingers brushing the monitor screens, her lips moving silently again. I caught a word this time, hungry, and my blood ran cold. "Keep working," she said finally, her voice sharp, and disappeared into the back office, the door clicking shut like a trap. I didn't look at the special cage again that night, but I felt it, like a weight pressing against my back. The scratching never stopped, and the air grew thicker, heavier, like it was alive. When my shift ended, I drove home in a daze, the road blurring through my windshield. My apartment felt too small, too exposed, and I kept the lights on, the notebook's words looping in my head. Experiments. Basement. Don't trust Marjorie. I checked my phone again, searching for the shelter's website, but it was still gone, like it had never existed. The paycheck was real, though, $800, sitting in my account, taunting me. I needed it. I couldn't quit. The next night, I drove back to Haven's Rest, the trees seeming to close in tighter, the neon sign buzzing louder, spitting sparks that lit up the gravel like tiny fires. The air inside was heavier, the metallic smell sharper, and the animals were waiting, their eyes glowing brighter, unblinking. The scratching was a roar now, a relentless assault that made my head throb. I glanced at the special cage, the tarp still in place, but I swore I saw it move, a slow, deliberate shift, like something inside was waking up. I gripped the cart and started the feeding, my hands shaking, knowing I was running out of time to ignore what was really happening here. The monitors were my anchor, but they were starting to feel like a trap. 5 nights into my job at Haven's Rest, and the flickering screens on the security desk were the only things keeping me from losing it completely. The scratching in the walls was a constant now, a grinding pulse that followed me through the shelter's dim halls, louder than ever. The air was thick, heavy with that metallic tang that clung to my clothes, my skin, my thoughts. The animals, those things in the cages, watched me with their oil-slick eyes, unblinking, their silence louder than any bark or growl. I hadn't slept properly in days, my dreams filled with shadows that moved wrong and voices whispering my name. But I kept coming back. The money was too good, and I was too broke to walk away. Tonight, the shelter felt different, like it was holding its breath. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting jagged shadows that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking. I'd finished the midnight feeding, the cart of rancid meat and chemical-smelling grain stashed back in the storage room. The animals hadn't touched their food, just stared as I slid the trays through the slots, their synchronized breathing making my skin crawl. The special cage, still draped in its tarp, had been quiet tonight, no rasping, no whispers, but that only made me more uneasy. It was like it was waiting, biding its time. I sat at the security desk, my hands clammy, and focused on the monitors. There were 4 feeds, the exterior, showing the dark pine woods, the storage room, cluttered with crates, the hallway, with its peeling paint and locked doors, and the basement, always black, always offline. Marjorie's warning about the basement feed, "Don't worry about that one," echoed in my head, but I couldn't stop glancing at it, willing it to flicker to life. The notebook I'd found, with its scrawled warnings about experiments and the basement, was burning a hole in my thoughts. I hadn't touched it since I'd read it, but I could feel it in the break room, waiting for me to dig deeper. The exterior feed was my obsession tonight. The woods were pitch black, the shelter's floodlights barely cutting through the gloom, but something kept catching my eye. A flicker, a shape that didn't belong. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the screen, and saw it again, a figure, tall and impossibly thin, standing just beyond the tree line. Its limbs were too long, bending at angles that made my stomach lurch, and its head was tilted, like it was studying the shelter. I blinked, my heart hammering, and the figure was gone, the screen showing nothing but swaying pines. I rewound the feed, my fingers fumbling on the controls, but there was nothing, just trees and shadows. My pulse didn't slow. I'd seen it. I knew I had. The hallway feed was worse. Last night's glimpse of that motionless figure had left me rattled, and tonight, it was back. It stood in the corner of the frame, its shape vague but humanoid, its head tilted at that same unnatural angle. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, bleeding into the shadows. I stared at the screen for 10 minutes, my hands gripping the desk, waiting for it to do something. The walkie-talkie sat silent beside me. I grabbed it, my voice shaky. "Marjorie, you there? Something's on the hallway camera again." Static crackled, then nothing. I tried again, louder. "Marjorie." No answer, just a faint hum, like someone was listening but not responding. I grabbed my flashlight, its beam jittery in my trembling hand, and headed for the hallway. The air was colder here, the metallic smell sharper, like blood mixed with rust. The corridor was empty, the locked doors, office, storage, basement, unchanged. I checked each one, the padlocks cold and solid under my fingers. The basement door felt heavier tonight, its sign, "Authorized personnel only," peeling at the edges. I pressed my ear against it, holding my breath. Nothing. No thumps, no footsteps, just the faint scratching that never stopped. I backed away, my boots echoing too loudly, and hurried back to the desk. The animals were watching me again, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. I tried to focus on the cleaning schedule, but my gaze kept drifting to the monitors. The exterior feed flickered again, and there it was, the figure, closer now, standing just inside the floodlights. Its limbs were skeletal, its head tilted so far it looked broken, and its eyes, God, its eyes, glinted like wet glass. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, as it took a step forward, its movements jerky, like a puppet with cut strings. The screen flickered, and it was gone. I checked the locks again, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold the keys. Everything was secure, but it didn't feel secure. It felt like the shelter was a cage, and I was the one locked inside. Marjorie appeared near the end of my shift, her wiry frame moving silently through the main room. Her gray eyes locked onto me, unblinking, her smile tight and wrong. "You're spending too much time on those cameras," she said, her voice low, almost a hiss. "Focus on your work." I swallowed, my throat dry. "I saw something," I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "On the exterior feed. Something, not right." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed, glinting under the fluorescence. "The woods play tricks," she said, her fingers brushing the monitor screens, leaving faint smudges. "Don't let them distract you." She turned and disappeared into the back office, the door clicking shut like a gunshot. I didn't touch the cameras for the rest of the night, but I felt them, like eyes on my back. The scratching was louder, sharper, like claws on bone, and the air was so heavy I could barely breathe. The special cage was still, but I swore the tarp shifted, just a fraction, like something inside was breathing. I didn't look. I couldn't. When my shift ended, I drove home, the road blurring through my windshield, the trees leaning in closer, like they were trying to swallow me. My apartment felt wrong, too small, too exposed, and I kept the lights on, the notebook's words looping in my head, their experiments. Check the basement. I checked my phone again, searching for any trace of Haven's Rest, but the website was still gone, the job ad erased. The paycheck was real, though, $800, sitting in my account, a lifeline I couldn't cut. I told myself I'd quit tomorrow, pack up and leave, but I knew I wouldn't. Not yet. I needed the money, and part of me, some stupid, reckless part, needed to know what was on those cameras, what was in that cage, what was waiting in the basement. The next night, I drove back to Haven's Rest, the neon sign spitting sparks, the air thick with that metallic stench. The animals were waiting, their eyes brighter, their silence heavier. The scratching was a roar now, a relentless assault that made my head throb. I glanced at the monitors, my heart sinking, knowing I'd see something I couldn't unsee. The exterior feed was clear, but the hallway feed flickered, and there it was, the figure, closer now, its head tilted, its eyes glinting. It raised a hand, long and claw-like, and the screen went black. The monitors were no longer a refuge, just a window into something I wasn't supposed to see. 6 nights at Haven's Rest, and the shelter was clawing its way into my head, its scratching sounds burrowing deeper each shift. The air was so thick now I could feel it pressing against my skin, heavy with that metallic stench, blood and rust, mixed with something sour that made my throat burn. The animals, those wrong things in the cages, watched me with their oil-slick eyes, their silence a scream in itself. I hadn't slept more than a few hours in days, my dreams haunted by flickering shadows and that guttural whisper from the special cage, saying my name. I kept coming back, though, the $800 paychecks chaining me to this place like a leash. But it wasn't just the money anymore. Something in me needed to know what was happening here, even if it killed me. Tonight, the shelter felt alive, the concrete walls pulsing with the scratching that never stopped. The fluorescent lights flickered more than usual, casting jagged shadows that seemed to move when I turned away. I'd finished the midnight feeding, the cart of rancid meat and chemical grains stashed away, the animals still ignoring their trays. Their eyes followed me, glowing faintly, their breath sinking in a way that made my chest tighten. The special cage was quiet, its tarp undisturbed, but that silence was worse than the rasping I'd heard before. It felt like a trap, like something inside was waiting for me to slip. I sat at the security desk, my hands trembling, the monitors flickering in the dim light. The exterior feed showed the woods, dark and endless, but I didn't trust it anymore, not after seeing that tall, thin figure with its broken angles and glinting eyes. The hallway feed was worse. Last night's image of that claw-like hand reaching toward the camera had burned itself into my brain, and I couldn't stop checking the screen, expecting it to reappear. The basement feed was still black, labeled offline, but Marjorie's warning, "Don't worry about that one," felt like a lie I couldn't ignore. The notebook's words were louder now, screaming in my head, "They're not animals. They're experiments. Don't trust Marjorie. Check the basement." I hadn't gone back to the notebook since I'd found it in the break room, tucked under a stack of papers like someone wanted it hidden. But tonight, I couldn't resist. I needed answers, something to make sense of the shadows, the whispers, the scratching. I slipped into the break room, the air colder here, the metallic smell sharper. The notebook was still there, its cover worn, its pages yellowed and crinkled. I flipped it open, my hands shaking, the fluorescent light casting my shadow across the jagged handwriting. The first page was the same, "They're not animals. They're experiments. Don't trust Marjorie. Check the basement." But there were more entries, ones I hadn't read, each one worse than the last. Subject 7 escaped last week. Found it in the woods. Mimicking a hiker's voice. Contained, but not before it took Carter. Marjorie knows. She's part of it. Feeding them something more than meat. The basement is where they're made. Don't go down there. They'll see you. My stomach churned, bile rising in my throat. The words mimicking and made stuck in my head, twisting like knives. I flipped to another page, my fingers leaving sweaty smudges. "They're watching through the cameras. They know your name." I dropped the notebook, my heart pounding, and glanced at the break room's small security monitor. The hallway feed flickered, and there it was, the figure, standing in the corner, its head tilted, its limbs too long. It raised a hand, claw-like fingers curling, and the screen went black. I grabbed the walkie-talkie, my voice cracking. "Marjorie, something's on the camera again." Static, then silence. No answer. I clutched the flashlight, its beam shaking in my hand, and checked the hallway. Empty. The locked doors. Office, storage, basement, stared back at me, the padlock on the basement door glinting like a warning. The thumps I'd heard before were louder tonight, coming from below, heavy and deliberate, like something dragging itself across concrete. I pressed my ear to the door, my breath shallow, and heard it, a low, wet rasp, like the sound from the special cage, but deeper, hungrier. Back at the desk, I tried to focus on the cleaning, but the scratching was deafening now, a chorus of claws that seemed to come from everywhere, walls, floor, ceiling. The animals were watching, their eyes brighter, almost glowing, their silence heavier than ever. I checked the exterior feed, my hands shaking, and saw it again, the figure, closer now, standing just inside the floodlights. Its head was tilted so far it looked broken, its eyes glinting like wet glass, and it moved, jerky and wrong, like a marionette with tangled strings. The screen flickered, and it was gone, but I swore I heard something outside. A faint, scraping sound, like claws on gravel. Marjorie appeared an hour later, her gray eyes unblinking, her smile tight and predatory. "You're digging, Alex," she said, her voice low, almost a growl. "Stop digging." She leaned over the desk, her fingers brushing the monitors, leaving smudges that looked too dark, too thick, like oil. "Focus on your work. The cameras lie." I swallowed, my throat dry. "I saw something," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Outside. In the hallway." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed, glinting like the animals. "The woods are tricky," she said. "So are the shadows. Ignore them." She turned and vanished into the back office, the door clicking shut like a coffin lid. I didn't touch the notebook again that night, but its words followed me, clawing at my thoughts. The scratching was louder, the air heavier, and the animals' eyes seemed to burn brighter, like they were seeing through me. The special cage was still, but I felt it watching, its presence a weight I couldn't shake. When my shift ended, I drove home, the road darker, the trees closer, their branches scraping my car like fingers. My apartment felt wrong, exposed, and I kept the lights on, the notebook's warnings looping in my head. "They're watching through the cameras. They know your name." I checked my phone, desperate for proof Haven's Rest was real, but the website was gone, the job ad erased. The paycheck was there, $800, sitting in my account, a chain I couldn't break. I told myself I'd quit, leave this place behind, but I knew I wouldn't. Not yet. The notebook had me hooked, its words pulling me back, demanding I find the basement, uncover what Marjorie was hiding. The next night, I drove back to Haven's Rest, the neon sign spitting sparks, the air thick with that sour, metallic stench. The animals were waiting, their eyes glowing, the scratching a roar that drowned out everything else. I glanced at the monitors, my heart sinking, knowing the figure would be there, watching, waiting, its claw-like hand reaching for me. The shelter was a living thing, and it was angry. 7 nights at Haven's Rest, and I was unraveling, my nerves frayed to threads by the scratching that clawed through the walls, the floor, my skull. The air was so thick it felt like breathing tar, heavy with that metallic stench, blood, rust, and that sour, chemical edge that burned my throat. The animals, those wrong creatures in their cages, watched me with their oil-slick eyes, their silence a blade against my spine. I hadn't slept in days, my dreams choked with shadows that moved wrong, voices whispering my name, and the notebook's words, "They're not animals. They're experiments. Don't trust Marjorie. Check the basement." The $800 paychecks kept me coming back, but it wasn't just the money anymore. The notebook had hooked me, its warnings pulling me deeper into this place, even as every instinct screamed to run. Tonight, the shelter felt tighter, the concrete walls closing in, the fluorescent lights buzzing louder, spitting sparks that danced across the floor. I'd finished the midnight feeding, the cart of rancid meat and chemical grain stashed away, the animals ignoring their trays as always. Their eyes glowed brighter now, almost pulsing, their synchronized breathing making my chest ache. The special cage, draped in its tarp, was silent, but that silence was a lie. I'd heard it whisper my name before, and tonight, I felt it watching, its presence like a hand on the back of my neck. I avoided it, keeping my eyes on the floor, but the scratching was deafening, a relentless roar that seemed to come from everywhere, walls, ceiling, inside my head. I sat at the security desk, my hands shaking, the monitors flickering in the dim light. The exterior feed showed the dark woods, the trees swaying like they were alive, but I didn't trust it, not after seeing that tall, thin figure with its broken limbs and glinting eyes. The hallway feed was worse, the memory of that claw-like hand reaching toward the camera burned into me. The basement feed was still black, labeled offline, but I'd seen it flicker once, showing a concrete room, a single bulb, and something moving, too big, too wrong. The notebook's warning, "Check the basement," was a drumbeat in my skull, but the padlocked door and Marjorie's sharp voice kept me away. For now. Then it happened. The lights flickered, a sharp buzz cutting through the air, and the monitors blinked out. The shelter plunged into darkness, the fluorescence dying with a low hum. The animals erupted, not barking or growling, but howling, a sound that wasn't canine, wasn't feline, but something primal, like screams trapped in throats that weren't human. My heart slammed against my ribs, my flashlight beam jittering across the cages. Their eyes glowed brighter, cutting through the dark, locked on me. The scratching stopped, replaced by that howl, a chorus that vibrated through the floor, the walls, my bones. I grabbed the walkie-talkie, my voice cracking. "Marjorie. The power's out. What's happening?" Static, then silence. No answer. The special cage was the worst. In the dark, I heard it, a low, guttural whisper, my name again, drawn out like a hiss. "Alex," it came from under the tarp, clear and deliberate, not human but trying to be. My flashlight beam swung toward it, shaking so bad the light danced across the tarp. It moved, a slow, deliberate shift, like something inside was pressing against it, testing the bars. I backed away, my boots slipping on the gritty floor, my breath shallow and sharp. The howling grew louder, the animal's eyes like beacons in the dark, and the whisper came again, louder, layered, like multiple voices speaking at once. "Come closer, Alex." I bolted for the front door, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly. The keys were in my pocket, but the lock wouldn't turn, the mechanism grinding uselessly. I tried again, my hands slick with sweat, but it was stuck, like something was holding it shut. The howling was deafening now, the air so heavy I could barely move, like it was pushing me back. I ran to the back door, then the windows, but everything was locked, sealed, trapping me inside. The walkie crackled, unprompted, and Marjorie's voice came through, soft and mocking. "Stay calm, Alex. It's just a flicker." I screamed into it, "The doors are locked. I can't get out." Static, then that faint laugh again, cold and sharp, like she knew something I didn't. The lights flickered back on, weaker, casting a sickly yellow glow. The monitors blinked to life, but the hallway feed was wrong. Marjorie stood there, motionless, staring directly into the camera. Her eyes were too wide, too black, glinting like the animals. Her smile was gone, replaced by something blank, something that wasn't human. The screen flickered, and she was gone. I checked the hallway myself, flashlight in hand, but it was empty, just peeling paint and locked doors. The thumps from the basement were louder now. Heavy and deliberate, like something massive dragging itself across concrete. The notebook's words screamed in my head, "The basement is where they're made." I ran to the break room, my hands shaking, and grabbed the notebook. The pages were worse now, new entries in that jagged handwriting. Subject 12 is growing too fast. It knows names now. Marjorie's feeding them something alive. They're in the walls, watching. My stomach churned, bile burning my throat. I flipped to the last page, my fingers leaving sweaty smudges. they mimic to lure. Don't listen. The howling stopped, replaced by the scratching again, louder, closer, like it was coming from inside the room. I dropped the notebook, my flashlight beam swinging wildly, and saw it, a shadow, moving across the wall, too tall, too thin, its limbs bending wrong. I grabbed a crowbar from the supply closet, my only weapon, my hands trembling so bad I could barely hold it. The monitors flickered again, the exterior feed showing that figure, closer now, standing in the gravel lot. Its head was tilted, its eyes glinting, and it moved, jerky and wrong, toward the shelter's door. The screen went black. The scratching was everywhere, a roar that drowned out my thoughts, and the air was so heavy I could feel it pressing against my chest, squeezing the breath from me. The special cage was still, but I heard it again, my name, whispered in that guttural chorus, promising things I didn't want to hear. When my shift ended, I didn't wait for Marjorie. I ran to my car, the keys finally working, and drove home, the road blurring through my tears. My apartment felt exposed, the lights too weak to push back the dark. I kept the crowbar by my bed, the notebook's words looping in my head, they mimic to lure. Don't listen. I checked my phone, but Haven's Rest was gone, no website, no ad, just the $800 in my account, a chain I couldn't break. I told myself I'd quit, but I knew I wouldn't. The notebook, the cameras, the basement, they were pulling me back, demanding I see what was down there. The next night, I drove to Haven's Rest, the neon sign spitting sparks, the air thick with that sour stench. The animals were waiting, their eyes glowing, the scratching a scream that never stopped. I glanced at the monitors, knowing the figure was there, watching, its claw-like hand reaching closer. The shelter was no longer just a building, it was a predator, and I was its prey. 8 nights at Haven's Rest, and I was a wreck, my mind splintered by the relentless scratching that clawed through the walls, the floor, my thoughts. The air was suffocating, thick with that metallic stench, blood, rust, and that sour, chemical burn that coated my tongue. The animals, those twisted things in their cages, watched me with their oil-slick eyes, their silence louder than any scream. I hadn't slept in days, my dreams choked with shadows that bent wrong, voices whispering my name, and the notebook's warnings, they're not animals. They're experiments. Don't trust Marjorie. Check the basement. The $800 paychecks kept me tethered, but it was more than money now. The notebook, the cameras, the whispers, they were pulling me toward something I couldn't escape, something that wanted me to see it. Tonight, the shelter felt tighter, the concrete walls pulsing with the scratching, the fluorescent lights flickering like they were gasping for air. I'd survived the power flicker last night, the howling of the animals still echoing in my skull, that guttural whisper from the special cage, Alex, come closer, burning through my thoughts. I hadn't looked at the tarp since, but I felt it, a presence that pressed against me, waiting. The monitors were no help anymore, their flickering feeds showing glimpses of that tall, thin figure with its broken limbs and glinting eyes. The hallway feed was the worst, Marjorie's black-eyed stare and claw-like hand haunting me. The basement feed was still black, but the notebook's words. The basement is where they're made, were a hook in my gut, pulling me toward the padlocked door. I sat at the security desk, my hands trembling, the crowbar from the supply closet clutched like a lifeline. The animals were quieter tonight, their eyes glowing brighter, almost pulsing, their synchronized breathing making my chest ache. The scratching was a roar, a relentless assault that seemed to come from inside the walls, the ceiling, my head. I checked the monitors, my heart sinking, knowing I'd see something I couldn't unsee. The exterior feed showed the gravel lot, the trees swaying, but the figure was there, closer now, standing just beyond the floodlights. Its head was tilted, its eyes glinting like wet glass, and it moved, jerky and wrong, like a puppet with no strings. The screen flickered, and it was gone, but I heard it, a faint scraping, like claws on gravel, right outside the door. The walkie-talkie crackled, unprompted. "Alex, you're not listening," Marjorie's voice hissed, soft and mocking. "Stay away from the basement." I fumbled for the button, my voice shaking. "I didn't do anything." "What's down there?" Static, then that faint laugh, cold and sharp, like she was standing right behind me. I spun around, flashlight beam swinging, but the main room was empty, just the cages and their glowing eyes. The scratching stopped for a moment, then started again, louder, closer, like it was coming from the floor beneath me. I couldn't take it anymore. The notebook's warnings, the thumps from the basement, the figure on the cameras, they were all pointing to one place. I grabbed the crowbar and headed for the basement door, my boots echoing in the silent hallway. The padlock was gone, the door cracked open, a sliver of darkness spilling out. The air was colder here, thick with that sour, chemical smell, mixed with something new, rotting flesh, like a carcass left in the sun. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing a concrete staircase descending into shadow. The thumps were louder now, heavy and deliberate, like something massive dragging itself across the floor. I hesitated, the notebook's words screaming in my head, "The basement is where they're made." I stepped onto the stairs, the crowbar slick in my sweaty grip. The air grew heavier with each step, the smell choking me, my flashlight beam shaking. The basement was a maze of concrete tunnels, the walls slick with moisture, glistening like skin. Cages lined the walls, but these were different, larger, reinforced with steel bars, some bent outward like something had tried to escape. My beam caught glimpses of scratches on the concrete, deep and jagged, like claws had torn through it. The thumps were closer, echoing through the tunnels, and I heard something else, a low, wet rasp, like the sound from the special cage, but deeper, hungrier. I turned a corner and froze. In the center of the room was a pit, maybe 10 feet wide, filled with a black, viscous liquid that bubbled faintly. Shapes moved in it, too many limbs, too many eyes, twisting and writhing like they were trying to form something. My stomach churned, bile burning my throat. My flashlight beam swung across the pit, catching something else, a bone, human-sized, picked clean, lying on the concrete. I gagged, backing away, my foot slipping on the slick floor. The rasp grew louder, and I heard it, my name, whispered in that guttural chorus, coming from the pit. "Alex." I ran, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly, the crowbar slipping from my grip and clattering to the floor. The tunnel seemed to twist, the walls closing in, the scratching roaring in my ears. Shadows moved in the corners, tall and thin, their limbs bending wrong, their eyes glinting like the animals upstairs. I stumbled up the stairs, my lungs burning, and slammed the basement door shut, my hands shaking so bad I could barely turn the lock. The thumps followed me, heavy and relentless, like something was climbing the stairs. Back in the main room, the animals were silent, their eyes glowing brighter, watching me. The special cage was still, but the tarp had shifted, a corner lifted, revealing a sliver of darkness inside. I didn't look. I couldn't. The monitors flickered, the hallway feed showing Marjorie again, standing motionless, her eyes black and unblinking, her smile gone. The screen went dark. I grabbed the walkie-talkie, screaming, "Marjorie, what's in the basement?" No answer, just static, and that faint laugh, colder now, like it was coming from inside me. When my shift ended, I ran to my car, the keys working this time, and drove home, the road blurring through my tears. My apartment felt wrong, the walls too thin, the lights too weak. I kept the crowbar by my bed, the notebook's words looping in my head, they mimicked a lure. "Don't listen." I checked my phone, but Haven's Rest was gone, no website, no ad, just the $800 in my account, a chain I couldn't break. I told myself I'd quit, but the basement was calling now. Its secrets pulling me back. The next night, I drove to Haven's Rest, the neon sign spitting sparks, the air thick with that rotting stench. The animals were waiting, their eyes burning, the scratching a scream that drowned out everything. I glanced at the basement door, knowing I'd have to go back down, knowing something was waiting for me. The basement had seen me, and now I couldn't unsee it. 9 nights at Haven's Rest, and I was a ghost of myself, my mind shredded by the scratching that never stopped, the air so thick with that metallic, rotting stench it clung to my skin like a second layer. The animals, those things in the cages, watched me with their oil-slick eyes, their silence a weight that crushed my chest. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten properly, my dreams drowned in the black, bubbling pit I'd seen downstairs, the human-sized bone, the shadows with too many limbs. The notebook's words were a noose around my neck. They're not animals. They're experiments. Don't trust Marjorie. They mimic to lure. Don't listen. The $800 paychecks kept me here, but it was more than money now. The basement was calling, its secrets clawing at me, demanding I look again, even as my body screamed to run. Tonight, the shelter was a living wound, the concrete walls pulsing with the scratching, the fluorescent lights flickering like they were bleeding out. I'd barely made it through the midnight feeding, the cart of rancid meat and chemical grain trembling in my hands as I slid trays into the cages. The animals didn't touch the food, their eyes glowing brighter, almost burning, their synchronized breathing a rhythm that matched the thumps from the basement. The special cage was silent, its tarp still lifted at the corner, revealing a sliver of darkness that seemed to breathe. I didn't look closer. I couldn't. The memory of that guttural whisper, "Alex, come closer," was enough to make my hands shake. I sat at the security desk, the crowbar clutched in my lap, the monitors flickering in the dim light. The exterior feed showed the gravel lot, the trees swaying like they were reaching for the shelter, but I knew the figure was out there, waiting. I'd seen it too many times, tall, thin, its limbs bending wrong, its eyes glinting like wet glass. The hallway feed was worse, Marjorie's black-eyed stare burned into my memory, her claw-like hand reaching for the camera. The basement feed was still black, but I'd seen it flicker, showing that pit, those shapes, that bone. The notebook's warning, "The basement is where they're made," was a pulse in my skull, urging me to go back, to see more. Then it came again, unprompted, from the special cage, a voice, low and guttural, layered like a chorus of throats. "Alex." My flashlight beam swung toward the tarp, shaking so bad the light danced across the bars. The tarp shifted, a slow, deliberate movement, like something inside was pressing against it, testing its limits. The animals in the other cages were silent, their eyes locked on me, glowing like embers. The scratching was deafening, a roar that seemed to come from inside the walls, the floor, my head. I grabbed the walkie-talkie, my voice barely a whisper. "Marjorie, it's talking again." The cage. It said my name. Static, then that faint laugh, cold and sharp, like it was coming from the air around me. The lights flickered, weaker this time, the fluorescence humming like dying insects. The monitors blinked, and the hallway feed showed Marjorie, standing motionless, her eyes too wide, too black, staring into the camera. Her smile was gone, her face blank, but her head tilted at that wrong angle, like the figure outside. The screen flickered, and she was gone. I checked the hallway, flashlight in one hand, crowbar in the other, but it was empty, just peeling paint and locked doors. The thumps from the basement were louder, heavier, like something massive was climbing the stairs. I pressed my ear to the basement door, the metal cold against my skin, and heard it, a wet, rasping sound, like the pit's bubbling, but closer, hungrier. The voices came again, not just from the special cage but from everywhere, walls, floor, ceiling. "Alex," they whispered, layered and wrong, some deep, some high, some almost human but not quite. I backed away, my flashlight beam swinging wildly, catching the animal's eyes, brighter now, burning through the dark. The tarp on the special cage lifted further, revealing more of the darkness inside, something fleshy, shifting, like it couldn't decide what to be. I stumbled back to the desk, my heart hammering, and checked the monitors. The exterior feed showed the figure, closer now, standing in the gravel lot, its head tilted, its claw-like fingers twitching. The screen flickered, and it was gone, but I heard it, scraping, just outside the door, like claws on concrete. I ran to the break room, barricading the door with a chair, my hands shaking so bad I dropped the crowbar. The notebook was still there, its pages open, the jagged handwriting worse now. Subject 12 knows too much. It's learning. Marjorie's one of them now. They're in the walls, in the cameras, in your head. My stomach churned, bile burning my throat. I flipped to a new page. Don't listen to the voices. They want you to open the cage. The voices came again, louder, a chorus of my name, promising things I didn't want to hear, safety, answers, escape. I clamped my hands over my ears, but they were inside me, clawing at my thoughts. The lights flickered again, and the scratching became a scream, a relentless assault that shook the walls. The monitors blinked, the hallway feed showing Marjorie again, closer now, her eyes black pools, her fingers long and claw-like, reaching for the camera. The screen went black. I grabbed the crowbar and ran to the basement door, the voices following me, whispering, laughing, promising. The padlock was gone, the door cracked open, the rotting stench spilling out. I stepped inside, flashlight beam shaking, the tunnel stretching before me, the pits bubbling louder, the shapes inside moving faster, more limbs, more eyes. A voice came from the dark, not Marjorie's, but deeper, layered, like 100 throats speaking at once. You shouldn't be here, Alex. I swung my flashlight, the beam catching nothing but wet concrete and bent cages. The shadows moved, folding in on themselves, forming shapes, tall, thin, their limbs bending wrong, their eyes glinting like the animals upstairs. I ran, the voices chasing me, my name a chant that echoed through the tunnels. I stumbled up the stairs, slamming the door shut, my hands trembling, the thumps louder, closer, like something was right behind me. Back in the main room, the animals were silent, their eyes burning, watching. The special cage was uncovered now, the tarp gone, revealing something inside, part flesh, part shadow, its body shifting, pulsing, pressing against the bars. The monitors flickered, the exterior feed showing the figure at the door, its claw-like hand scraping the handle. When my shift ended, I ran to my car, the keys working, and drove home, the road blurring, the trees clawing at my windshield. My apartment felt wrong, the walls too thin, the lights too weak. I kept the crowbar by my bed, the voices still whispering in my head, Alex, come closer. I checked my phone, no Haven's Rest, no ad, just the $800, a chain I couldn't break. The next night, I drove back, the neon sign spitting sparks, the voices louder, the scratching a scream, knowing I'd hear them again, knowing they'd never stop. The voices were inside me now, a chorus of whispers that clawed at my thoughts, calling my name through the suffocating dark. 10 nights at Haven's Rest, and I was barely human, my body trembling, my mind a frayed wire sparking with panic. The shelter was no longer a place. It was a living thing, its concrete walls pulsing with the relentless scratching, the air thick with that metallic, rotting stench that burned my lungs. The animals, those twisted experiments, watched with their oil-slick eyes, their silence a scream that crushed my chest. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, my dreams drowned in the black pit from the basement, the human bone, the shadows with too many limbs. The notebook's words were a chain around my neck. They're not animals. They're experiments. Don't trust Marjorie. They mimic to lure. Don't listen. The $800 paychecks kept me here, but it was more than money now. The voices, the basement, the special cage, they wanted me to see, to open, to let them out. Tonight, the shelter was a trap, its walls tighter, the fluorescent lights flickering like they were bleeding out. I'd skipped the midnight feeding, too shaken to push the cart of rancid meat and chemical grain. The animals didn't care. They never ate, just stared, their eyes glowing brighter, almost burning, their synchronized breathing a rhythm that matched the thumps from the basement. The special cage was uncovered now. Its tarp gone, revealing something inside, flesh and shadow, shifting, pulsing, pressing against the bars until they groaned. I didn't look at it, couldn't, but I felt it, a presence that wrapped around me like a noose. The scratching was a roar, a relentless assault from the walls, the floor, my skull, and the voices were louder, clearer, whispering my name in a guttural chorus, "Alex, come closer." I sat at the security desk, the crowbar slick in my sweaty grip, the monitors flickering in the dim light. The exterior feed showed the gravel lot, the trees clawing at the dark, but the figure was there, closer than ever, standing just outside the door. Its limbs were too long, bending wrong, its head tilted so far it looked broken, its eyes glinting like wet glass. The hallway feed was worse. Marjorie, or whatever she was now, stood motionless, her eyes black pools, her fingers claw-like, reaching for the camera. The basement feed was still black, but I'd seen the pit, the shapes, the bone. The notebook's warning, "The basement is where they're made," was a scream in my head, but the voices were louder, promising answers, promising escape. The lights flickered, a sharp buzz cutting through the air, and the monitors blinked out. The animals howled, that primal, non-human scream that shook the walls, their eyes burning through the dark. The voices from the special cage grew louder, a chorus of my name, layered and wrong, some deep, some high, some almost human but not quite. "Alex, open the cage." I grabbed the walkie-talkie, my voice breaking. "Marjorie, it's talking. The cage, it's talking." Static, then that laugh, cold and sharp, like it was coming from the air around me. The front door was locked, the keys useless, the back door sealed, the windows bolted. I was trapped, the shelter a cage, and I was the one inside. I ran to the break room, barricading the door with a chair, the crowbar trembling in my hands. The notebook was open, its jagged handwriting worse now. Subject 12 is free. It knows you. Marjorie's gone. She's one of them. They're in your head now. Don't open the cage. The voices came again, louder, from the walls, the floor, the air, promising freedom if I'd just listen, just open the cage. I clamped my hands over my ears, but they were inside me, clawing at my thoughts. The scratching was a scream, the thumps from the basement louder, closer, like something was climbing the stairs. The lights flickered back on, weak and yellow, and the monitors blinked to life. The hallway feed showed Marjorie, closer now, her eyes black and unblinking, her fingers long and claw-like, scraping the camera lens. The screen went black. I ran to the basement door, the voices chanting my name, the scratching deafening, the air so heavy I could barely breathe. The padlock was gone, the door wide open, the rotting stench spilling out like a wave. I stepped inside, flashlight beam shaking, the tunnel stretching before me, the pits bubbling louder, the shapes inside moving faster, more limbs, more eyes. A voice came from the dark, not Marjorie's, but deeper, layered, 100 throats at once. "You shouldn't be here, Alex." I swung my flashlight, the beam catching shadows, tall, thin, their limbs bending wrong, their eyes glinting like the animals upstairs. I swung the crowbar, hitting something soft and wet, black ooze splattering the concrete. It didn't scream, didn't flinch, just laughed, that same cold laugh from the walkie. I ran, the voices chasing me, my name a chant that echoed through the tunnels. I stumbled up the stairs, slamming the door, but the thumps were right behind me, heavy and relentless. Back in the main room, the animals were silent, their eyes burning, the special cage pulsing, its bars groaning under the weight of whatever was inside. The front door was suddenly unlocked, the keys working now, and I ran, the gravel crunching under my boots, the trees clawing at the dark. My car wouldn't start, the engine coughing, dead. I kept running, branches tearing at my skin, the voices following, whispering my name, promising they'd find me. A trucker's headlights cut through the dark, his rig slowing as I stumbled onto the road. I climbed in, gasping, saying nothing, my flashlight and crowbar left behind, my phone, my keys, my wallet, all gone. I didn't look back. The shelter vanished into the trees, the neon signs buzz fading. My apartment felt wrong, the walls too thin, the lights too weak. I kept the lights on, the notebook's words looping in my head, they mimicked to lure. Don't listen. I checked my phone, but it was gone, left at the shelter, and Haven's Rest was nowhere, no website, no ad, just the $800 in my account, a chain I'd broken but couldn't forget. The voices were quieter now, but they were still there, whispering in the dark, my name, a promise they'd never let me go. The next night, I didn't go back. I couldn't. But I heard it, outside my window. A faint scratching, like claws on wood, and my name, whispered in that guttural chorus, closer than ever.